All right, everybody, welcome to the Parley Podcast. Special guest today. We have Maija Soderholm, correct? I pronounced that correctly?
It's Soderholm. There's no L in it. Yeah, Soderholm. Maija Soderholm, if you want to get like super specific.
Oh, well, if that's the way you pronounce it, that's the way I would like to try. It's that roll of the tongue, eh?
Yeah, Soderholm.
Soderholm. From Finland, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but I was obviously born in London, England, and that's why the accent is not Finnish.
Yes.
So there you go.
Well, that's pretty cool that you speak Finnish.
Yeah, I do. It was the first language I learned when I was a kid. Like my mother spoke Finnish to me at home. Both my parents are from Finland. They just happened to meet and marry in London, and so that's why I was brought up. But my Finnish is super rusty. I can understand very well. I can speak okay, but I speak very colloquial Finnish. It's not like accurate. Like I speak kid Finnish.
Yeah,
I can get by, but
that's how I am when I speak Portuguese. Like I can speak Portuguese to anybody and they'll understand me, but if I speak from somebody from the mainland, it's a mess.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, listen, I'm so happy you're here today. You're quite the interesting person. There's a lot of layers to you. I guess the first one I'd like to kind of touch on is your martial arts experience. You've been in martial arts for 20 years, more than 20 years.
Oh, let's see. Well, I fenced for a few years when I was a kid, so maybe that counts. I'm not sure. I did some foil fencing when I was about 9 through 13 before I became a teenager, and then kind of gave all that up for more exciting adventures and goofing off. Then I took martial arts up again I'm fairly old, so I've actually had time to do martial arts for a long time. And I started back in 1986. So I've been doing martial arts for that long. I won't say I was serious at that point. But that's when I started doing internal martial arts. I was actually working out at a gym in the UK, and it was a powerlifting and sort of powerlifting gym. It was one of those sort of old school places in a labor club, like in the basement. It was all kind of free weights, and everything was a little bit rusty and damp, of course, because it's the UK. But I would always go work out really early in the morning, and there was always just the same crew in there in the mornings when I would go. And there was this one guy, and he's doing like arm curls or something. And I'm like, Jerry, what are you doing? You're doing them so interestingly, so differently from everybody else. Because what he was doing was he was standing in a very particular posture, and he was doing very slow reverses, right? This is like 1985, 86. And he's like, oh, I started going to a Tai Chi class, and I'm using the principles in my weight training. And this guy was a natural bodybuilder. He was amazing. This guy could flex any tiny muscle on his body and just go, oh, the intercostals, you mean these? And he was great. He was a real aid to me, but I was like, oh, well, that sounds interesting. I'll go check it out. So that was my first exposure to it, and I kind of got hooked. And so I started internal martial arts about then. I moved it to the States in the early 90s, and I probably started seriously training in 95 until now. So yeah, that long.
Where did the love and the passion come in for the weaponry?
I have no idea. Everybody asked me that. We could talk about past life experiences, maybe. I'm not sure, but
whatever you like.
Ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be Errol Flynn. That was Captain Blood, Robin Hood, all the swashbuckling movies, the Three Musketeers. Like that's why my parents took me to fencing class in the first place, because I would steal all the cutlery out the drawers, and I'd run around the house with knives and stuff.
They'd probably medicate you if we did that nowadays, eh?
Right? And so they took me to foil fencing class, and I just loved it. And I've always had that thing for the weapon arts, and it's always what's attracted me most. I don't know. So
how did you meet GM Sonny?
Sonny,
yes,
everybody knows that Sonny. The most people know about Sonny is that he was massively reclusive, right? So getting to train with him was really difficult. He was a very paranoid dude. He had his house was booby trapped, and you were not allowed to tell anybody his address when you trained with him. But
really?
Yeah, you couldn't tell. Yeah, you could take people to see him if he said that was okay, but you never turned up at his house without phoning first. You never just went and knocked on his door, So he was a interesting man. Anyway, my Bagua teacher at the time was training with him, and there was one of those TV VCR combos in the school, and he had this, because Sonny would video all his students. That was part of his training methodology. And there was this, video playing of Sonny moving around with a sword, and I was just like, oh my goodness. It's like, all my life that I've been doing martial arts, my whole martial arts career, that's what I've been looking for. I was like, that's it. I want to learn how to do that. I want to know how that man does that. And so my teacher at the time was teaching us some of the basic footwork and some of the basic blade angles, because that's what he was learning. So he was kind of sharing a little bit. And he invited Sonny to come and do a seminar at his school, which was fairly unusual. Sonny didn't like doing seminars close to home. He liked to do them very, very far away. And I tried to make a really good impression, right? Because I was like, I really want to train with this guy. And so I got a friend of mine who worked in a sheet metal shop to fabricate some training blades, because I'd heard he was really, really into making his own training tools. And so I was like, this is going to be a great excuse to talk to him after the seminar. I'll make some training weapons of my own and show that, I'm into it, right? Because I hate going and talking to teachers after class, because everybody asks such stupid questions and you feel like such a fanboy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, oh, I want to stand next to somebody dangerous. You don't want to look like a complete idiot. So I made I fabricated these training blades, and I, went to him, oh, thank you very much, Sonny. That was a really amazing seminar. I just thought I'd get a bit of your advice. I made these training blades. What do you think? So that was my sort of sneaky entry. And he said to me, oh, yeah, these are great, blah, 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 blah. No, yeah, your angles are really sharp. If you want to come and train with me, that would be okay. Just get your teacher to bring me. So that was my...
that was your in.
That was my invitation, yeah.
So when you started training with him now, how did you find his training methodology with regards to the weapon differ from your fencing? And what about his teaching? Did you realize like this is somebody I want to stay and train with? I like the way he teaches. Or
well, it turns out, I mean, his training methodology is completely different to anybody else's. I think when he started out, he used to be much more, I'm not going to say traditional, because I think he actually teaches in a very old traditional way, like backyard style, but not in a school format, which he had been doing for a while. He had like a curriculum with combinations and, patterns and stuff like that. And by the time he started teaching me, around that same time, maybe a year or two earlier, he'd started this thing called random flow as his teaching methodology, which is basically you're just always moving and everything's happening. Not in real time, like maybe, it's happening slower and a little bit more controlled, but you're basically thrown in at the deep end and given context first, and with the idea that everything becomes obvious when you're doing it in context. So random flow isn't sparring. So it wasn't like you're directly sparring all the time, because, if you don't know anything, like say you're playing tennis, right? If you play tennis against a pro and they just keep serving aces at you, you never learn anything. So it's a little bit like playing tennis with somebody that's sort of aiming things at you so you can hit them back, and then making it more difficult for you to hit them back. Does that make sense? So
technology.
Yeah, and I think for me, it worked great. It was one-on-one. Every time I left, it felt like my fingers had been stuck in the electric outlet and my hair was standing on end. And I was like, I have no idea what happened in that class. I have no idea what happened in that class. It's like, I have no idea if I'm getting any better. I don't know if I learned anything. I've got to learn how he does that. So my personality suited it. I don't think it necessarily suits everybody else, because I'll probably be honest in saying that for the first 4 years, I had no idea whether I'd learned anything.
Wow. And his format for teaching, was it usually one-on-one, or did he have small groups, or how did that work for the training?
Well, it was a combination of both. So I went a couple times a week. And one of the sessions usually was me and somebody else, me and maybe 2 people. And then one of my days was Sunday that I would go. And there would often be a time when I was on my own, but then people would start to filter in. So the method was he would focus on a concept or a weapon manipulation or something, some principle. And first you'd try it alone. He was a big fan of like hanging pendulum targets, so he had a lot of training gear. So you were trying this thing, and then you had it in motion, and then you tried it with people, and then you kind of put it more into kind of free play, and then, you know, with everybody else in the room. So he'd round robin
Oh, that's cool.
the technique with everybody else that was there. So because he was really good, it was impossible to fake him out. It was impossible to like pull one over on him, right? So all the things he'd teach you about how to manipulate people and how to bait and fake and use rhythm and stuff, he could read from a mile off. So you needed to practice what he could do on you on other people so that you could then own it. You know, you could find the correct timing. You could find, you know, how quickly you needed to retract your cut into a block before getting nailed. Because unless somebody's trying to hit you, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's totally different by energy.
Yeah.
Now, the style that he taught is corto cadena e largo mano escrima.
Okay, so it's Visayan style, corto cadena, and larga mano escrima. That's the full name. Yeah.
And is this more of a sword-based or a stick-based art?
Well, he started off mostly doing stick, but by the time he trained me, it was 90% sword, maybe 85% sword. Because he said that the sword is the primary weapon, and if you understand sword, you understand everything else. So what sword gives you, and he wasn't specific about this, but this is kind of what I've realized, you know, over the years, is that if you use sword, you make the highest risk versus reward kind of ratio that there is. And you take power out of the equation, and you take size to a certain extent out of the equation. You take reach out of the equation. You take a whole bunch of stuff out of the equation that now you don't have to deal with. So it forces you to sharpen all your accuracies. Like your understanding of range has to be perfect. Your understanding of timing has to be perfect. You have to use all your deceptive skills to create openings. You know, it's like if I'm big and strong, like if I was like your size, you know, it's like if you're a big, strong dude, right? You know, you can just kind of take a few blows with empty hand or even with stick, you know, and still kind of crash in and get the hits. But in sword, you know, you don't take cuts, because the thing you have to also remember is this is not a European armored system where you're in armor with heavy clothing on, like, which is more of a kind of a bashing system. You know, a lot, you know, those big swords are often not sharp, and they're only sharp at the tip, right? So there's a lot of beating people to the ground and then stabbing them. The Philippines is a very hot country. You know, nobody's wearing that much. They're in sandals, you know, thongs, right? You know, flip-flops and t-shirts, or maybe nothing. And so, and the other thing that I think is also interesting very specifically about the Filipino style is that you have this lethal weapon, this sword, but the metal is really shitty. So if you use it wrong, it breaks. So you have this horrible situation where you're facing something lethal with no clothes on, and if you use it wrong, it breaks.
Wow. That's never, yeah. I mean, the terrain and where it comes from plays a huge part.
Enormous part, yeah. And so we also did cane, like old man style, like largo style. I mean, there was every weapon that you want to think about. There was latigo, there's whips, throwing knives, empty hand, a lot of sikaran, the kicking stuff. I'm sure you've seen that on YouTube. Single stick, double sword, espada daga. You know, like everything is in there. But because what he was really teaching was a way to manipulate people, you know, the sword is first, then everything else layers on top of that. And of course, the difference with stick fighting is, one, you don't have to be quite as careful. You can take some hits, maybe, and you need some power. And so sword is also interesting, like I said, because it's the only weapon that literally I don't need to do anything and I can just walk towards you with. It only takes motion. It takes no effort.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And you know, yeah, like you say, you can take a shot. You can't be taking too many cuts. You know.
Well, I mean, I've argued with that, with people with that. You know, one of the things that you get off a lot of people that are very resistant to the idea of that is, oh, I'd take that cut, is one of the big ones. Oh, I'd take that. In return, it's like, well, I killed you. I'm like, yeah, but you're disemboweled. Yeah. You know, and it's like, yeah, sure. And that's okay if the job is to kill the other person for some reason. But if you die too, is that really a win? No. And, you know, maybe in some situation, But even, you know, the super duper special forces only do it so everybody else can get home. You know, like there's a real big reason why you're willing to kind of die in battle, right? It's not, you shouldn't take that lightly. And if you're training, you know, should you really be okay with that? You know, like that's the highest level you got.
No,
You know,
no.
I'm going to show you a picture. I think. Oh, here it is. So this is from this book. I put this in here. I asked a Marine medic friend of mine to show me some knife wound pictures that I could put in the book.
Yeah.
And I didn't. Okay, so trigger warning for those. There we go. This is the least weird, horrible one that I could find. It's like, I'd take that hand cut. It's like, really?
Yeah.
It's like, let's, you know, how about you want to use your hand again afterwards? So
that's just ego talking. But being, I mean, me personally, like I've done the like, I guess you can say, competed or fought in, if you would call that, in the Dog Brothers style.
Uh-huh.
One thing I've noticed for sure is when I train with the stick, when I fought with the stick, yes, I was careful because I didn't want to get my arms broken. But I did find that just by the nature of when I sparred with the knife, just for the nature of the knife, the idea of the knife, that if this was real, just that touch, I don't want that. It made me play a different game altogether. And I'm not talking about now. I'm talking about when I first started and had even like, because I kind of was the guy that just, like, I still don't know names of techniques, but I can do them. But that's just the kind of person I am. I just jumped in the pool, right? And just at a base level like that, my footwork and my strategy was much different because of the idea of what I was working with.
Very smart. I fought at Dog Brothers also one year. I did knife at Dog Brothers one year.
It's different.
Yeah.
It's very
well.
different.
The one thing I learned from that, it was the year when we had shock knives. It was like 2008, I think, 2007 maybe. That was when I went down to LA and fought at the Gathering, and they had shock knives, but it was really funny because they didn't really know at the time what they would do to your metal masks or anything like that if they would short out. So it was sort of mildly like, this is going to be exciting. What I realized with those is that once you take one cut, you don't care. It's just annoying. I think they're really useful tools for understanding how much you will get cut. Like say you're trying to do some ridiculous disarm or something. So they're good instant feedback loops, but they're not going to stop you from being stupid.
No, my favorite use of the shock knives really is when I am trying to do a disarm. If I am trying to work a disarm, like you say, you get that feedback. Oh, that would have been a cut there, because people think that, oh, I just put my form to the flat side of the blade and it's no problem, but that's not how it works. But really,
all you have to do is like
just change slightly. What I really like use the shock knives for is when I'm when I grapple. So you know, we'll grapple, jiu-jitsu something, and say, okay, and you know how you do like a Shark Tank, but we don't know who has the shock knife. So you'll be grappling, and then the blade comes out. Now you have to adjust your jiu-jitsu. That's where I find it. That's where I find it most efficient. But going back to the sword play versus the stick, how does that now? Because for me, I'm still kind of playing here with this idea, but the espada dagger, right? Like, I like to keep my blade in the fall. Like, I could have a false sleeve when I have a blade, but when I do espada dagger, I like to keep my blade in the front and my stick in the back, and that just works for me. That could be totally opposite of what you're supposed to do, but it works for me. But how does that now, the relationship of both weapons and the interplay with each other with regards to footwork and strategy work?
Well, there's the thing, right? It's like, I don't think there's any should about it. If I have my weapon out all the time in the front and I'm guarding, why would you ever enter? If I'm not controlling when you're going to do something, I'm already slightly at a disadvantage. Like, I'm going to be surprised. So I need to kind of puppeteer the situation to make you do things. Sonny would play blade low, like along the top of his legs a lot of the time, or really wide, you know, out, you know, because he wanted to invite people in. He's like, here's the door, you know, please, you know, it's like he would make people offers they couldn't refuse, but it would always be a setup. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's attack by draw. Yeah.
So what you should and shouldn't do is completely dependent on what the other person's doing. Mm-hmm. If the other person is staying back and you're both kind of just going by luck, if you like, your odds are not that good. It's one of the things I write in my book, that most people don't think about. It's not 50-50. You don't have a 50-50 chance in a blade fight. I mean, let's see, if you've only got two people, there's 4 options, right? Win-win, which is we both walk. There's win-lose, lose-win, but there's also lose-lose. And so you only really have, if you take away the you both walk away part, you only have 1 chance in 3 of like prevailing. And so you've got to up your odds as much as possible. And that's going to depend very much on what the other person's doing. If they don't want to enter, you're just like, all right, well, maybe I don't have to deal with it. Or maybe you're like, I do have to deal with it because I see his friends are coming from behind. And so I'm going to enforce the interaction so that I can control it. Sometimes if somebody's running towards you, you want to stick your blade out and be all like, no.
Stay back.
Yeah,
So I guess these are the teachings and these are the lessons that you acquired, which led you to write I believe, was your first book, The Liar, the Cheat, and the Thief?
Yes.
Awesome. Available on Amazon. So I know that it was in reference to the martial arts, but also from what I understand, it's not really just about using that concept for the martial arts. Can you speak to me a little bit, and to everybody listening, on how you use those principles and apply it for anything?
Well, I mean, my big insight from training with Sonny, and honestly, he did change my view of the world. After having trained with him for the time that I did, it felt like somebody had taken a bag off my head and said, what do you see now? The world looked completely different. And there is no martial art without an enemy. You can't do it without there being a threat. It's like the reason why you're doing everything is because another human being, at least until the aliens arrive, is opposing you and you're saying no, right? I mean, it's like you need a human being as an opposing force to do martial arts. And everything's so much about technical stuff. And, the second book probably is a better kind of big picture book. The Liar, the Thief, and the Cheat and the Thief it's more kind of like, it has the concepts. It's the same book in a lot of ways. It's just a slightly different way of looking at things. Is that everybody in martial art classes always assumes they've already won. It's like, when your opponent does this, do this thing, and if anything, maybe the first thing doesn't work, which means you switch and you do the next thing, right? Like that's how it's sort of trained. It's never talking about, why did they throw a number 1 at you? Why did they caveman at you? What made them think that they could hit you? It's like, obviously they thought they could. So, which is why they tried. It's like, okay, so how far back can I influence an interaction? If you think about real life self-defense stuff, for instance, there's a moment where somebody thinks that they're going to take you on, right? And it's like the earlier that you see that moment, the more control you have of it.
Yeah, most people aren't even aware they're potentially in a fight until they're actually, the physicality portion of it starts, and not understanding the cues and the flags prior to it.
Yeah, and everybody's all like, action over reaction. You need to be acting and not reacting. It's like, technically, you're always reacting, because if there wasn't a threat, you wouldn't have to do anything. So you're reacting because there's a threat. So you're doing the thing. It's like, okay, why does a threat think they're going to win? Because that's how you have to start, is a threat already thinks they're going to win. Your opponent already thinks they're going to win, Yeah. So if they already have that impression of you, how do you dissuade them of that? How do you maybe use that fact that then they think they're going to win against them, so you can take advantage of them? Do you see what I'm saying? It's like I'm manipulating the relationship between us much more than I'm worried about what I'm doing. The step 1 is intel gathering. It's like I'm learning as much as I can from all my opponents. I'm learning about them by how they walk, what they're looking at, where we are, what culture am I in? What's the situation? Do they have friends? There's a whole bunch of other stuff that plays into who people are. And there's not that many different types of people. I mean, I'm sure you found it, and it would be interesting to compare notes on that. But there's aggressive fighters and counter fighters, right? I mean, it's like those two are big main camps, huge generalizations, but you can usually, put one in, one or the other, right? And between that, now you already got like your tactics depending on which side of that you are. right? You fight aggressive fighters in a certain way and more counter fighters in a different way. And I usually assume people think that I'm weaker and foolish and I'm easy to kill. So I approach every interaction in that way. And my only real job is to make my opponent predictable, right? And for me to be unpredictable. So I either give them exactly what they think they want to see and use that against them, or I confuse them by giving them something they didn't expect.
Which now makes them have to think, and they're not in the moment.
Yeah, exactly. So now their whole train of like, oh, this is going to go like this, goes a different way, and they have to reset. And you have to remember that Sunny's system was interesting in that there was a lot of shit talking. I can talk to you. It's not just about weapon manipulation. It's about how I set up my body, like the way I look, what I do, if I smile or not, what I say, everything is part and parcel of it. So that's why I called it the liar, the cheat, and the thief, and also then the hustler, because the role model for this system is you want to be the pickpocket. The successful pickpocket gets in and out, and the other person doesn't even know they've been robbed.
Yeah.
Like, my job is not to kill. My job is to not die. If you want to have like a simple way of looking at the system, it's basically, one of the things Sunny said to me, and I wrote the quote in the book, but it basically said, it's like we're talking about blades here. It's not hard to kill somebody. And this is not psychologically. This is just like, all I have to do is walk towards you and put the knife in. He's like, there's no skill there. There's no art in killing. He said, but there's also no art in dying. He's like, I don't even need to practice that. It's like, that'll happen before you even, you realized it was happening. He says, the art is in the living, in the getting away, in the going home. So the whole system is based on that premise. And the first training kind of imperative, if you like, I'd always go and say, Sunny, what's the focus today? He says, don't get hit. Everything that I do, do not get hit, whatever that is, right? Wow. And that does, and so it's like, okay, run away is not getting hit. Avoiding the conflict is not getting hit. Blocking and parrying and not letting you get one in on me is not getting hit, but knocking you out is not getting hit, seeing as you can't hurt me. Or, lethal force is not getting hit. Like, it's all not getting hit. You're just doing it what you need to do.
I like that. It doesn't matter which route you take to the objective, just get to the objective.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, another one that I've used as a sort of a kind of like a parallel idea is basketball. So, all the guys that are juking, it's like, I always think of the ball as your life. And then there's all these threats that you have to get around. It's like, the win is to get the ball in the hoop, right?
Yeah.
It's not to kill the other people necessarily. It's to get by. So whether you use your evasion and motion, there's a reason why you are participating in this interaction, and that reason is you want to go home.
Did you ever feel like you had to work harder when sparring or training with certain men and their ego?
Oh yeah.
How did you get over that? Because for any female listening to this who feels that way, and doesn't know how to deal with it, I think it's important to hear somebody who's been successful at it speak up.
Okay, so I have two things. The first one, which I learned in Bagua class, actually after training with Sunny, but it was that if you go to a seminar and nobody wants to work with you, I mean, like, I'm of the era where most seminars that I ever went to was like all guys and me, or me and maybe one other woman, right? And everybody's like, okay, pair up and give this a go. Nobody wanted to work with me. I was like, oh, fuckers. Or else you get somebody that looks super bored, or else they're like, they have no control, one or the other. And I realized after a while that they ignore the small men too. That most people go to seminars to look impressive in front of the teacher. They don't really care about getting better. And so they're going to pick a partner that is just as big as them, that when they do the technique, they're going to look really good because they pulled it off. There is no status points in hitting a woman. There's no status points in throwing somebody my size, right? It's like, fuck the technique. It's just about kind of looking good. So that's one little thing for women to sort of keep in their mind when they do that at seminars. The other one is Sunny taught me one of the most valuable lessons ever. And it's a story I also tell in the book. It's called The Ringer. And Sonny would often get people coming up from or into town from LA or from other places to train with him, right? Like somebody would say, Sonny, you know, there's this guy that really wants to meet you. Is it all right to bring him by? It's like, oh yeah, sure. So after I've been going for a while, he would say to me, oh yeah, so there's this guy coming up from LA on Saturday. And then he'd leave this long pause. And it took me a little time before I realized that my job was then to say, oh, do you want me to come by? And he'd be like, yeah. Why don't you come? So, all right. And I'd like, what time? He'd give me a time and I'd turn up. And he'd always give me a time that was earlier than when the dude was going to show up. So by the time the guy showed up, you know, I'm sitting on the couch or something and Sonny's waiting for this guy. Guy turns up, hi, you know, pleased to meet you, Maestro. And he'd go, no, just Sonny. And he'd be on his best behavior and Sonny be like, blah, blah, blah. And this is Maya. And of course, guy looks over at me, chick on the couch, right? Yeah, hi. Completely ignoring me, you know, getting on with Sonny and stuff. And I'd just sit there. And Sonny would like move around with the guy a little bit, give him some basics, like, oh, let's flow a little bit, you know, show me some of your entries, you know, don't kill me too quickly, right? So they'd move around. Guy would be trying to make a good impression, so they'd be doing that for like 15, 20 minutes or something. Then Sonny would be like, oh, I really need to smoke. Sonny was a chain smoker. And he said, I'm just going to step out and have a cigarette, like he's like by the French doors to his patio, right? It's like, Maya, why don't you flow with, you know, dude for a while? It's like, all right. So I'd be kind of mimicking whatever he was doing, and the guy was like on his best behavior. And then Sonny would kind of go, and he'd give me a little bit of like, you know, let's spice it up a little bit. So I wouldn't speed up or anything, but I'd start to actually tag him, and I'd keep tagging his hands, I'd keep tagging his arms, I'd keep tagging whatever part of the body I could go to. And Sonny was watching the guy's reaction. Sonny was watching what the guy would do, how the guy would fail. Like that was the interview, was how do you fail? Wow. You know, you're in front of the guy that you're trying to impress and you're getting your ass beat by a woman. And it was funny because like, and some guys never came back. And it was funny because, you know, at first I was kind of a little bit pissed off and I'm like, damn it, you know, it's like he's totally using the sexism, you know, about their attitude towards me. And I was like, oh my God, he's total genius. You know, he's manipulating the facts. And he was the first person that told me that being underestimated can be a superpower. And yes. So that lesson in itself was really, really good. I write about it a lot in The Hustler, actually. So for women, I'd highly recommend reading The Hustler, because I think, you know, you get it in BJJ, right? You know, like there's just women that are just as skilled as guys. Women could take out guys and stuff 100%. Like that. Absolutely. But when you get to something that's a bit more like MMA style, that has striking in it and stuff, it's like women can be as technically excellent as men and better, but they can take less damage. And that's the problem. That's the asymmetry. It's like, if I hit you as hard as I could, body shots or in the arm or whatever, or, you know, maybe even got you good in the solar plexus, maybe I could take you out, maybe not, right? Like there's certain targets on you that I would have to get, and I would have to get them before you'd like decked me in pretty much any part of my body. You know, I bet you could break my ribs if you hit me hard enough, and maybe I could on you too. But the fact that the asymmetry of the damage taking is so uneven, if you like, you know, that's the difference between men and women, is that women have to avoid taking damage way more than men do. Even men my size are like, you know, their muscle mass is different to mine, right? Yeah. So the way I have to fight and what swords gave me is I've leveled the playing field, you know, and I can hit you on any part of your body. I can cut your hand off. Yeah. You know, so it's given me a real insight, but it also gave me a real insight into doing empty hand stuff, about which techniques would work for me and how I would have to approach it, right? There's some people that I've played with, 6'4", completely fearless, built like brick shit houses, like they say in England. And I'm like, if that person gets hold of me, I'm dead. Yeah. I'm like, what the hell? So it started to make me think about that. It's like, what could I do? And actually the best solution I came up with, empty hand, was Sealart doing some Harimau and taking their legs out and knees and then running and making sure they couldn't chase me. you know, and I couldn't come up with anything else. But it focuses your mind onto what's sensible, not like, oh, this totally works for a fit 20-year-old 200-pound dude. But, you know, I'm almost 60, you know, I'm 58.
Looking great.
Well, thank you so much. But, you know, you get injuries, you get older, you know, I start out at a disadvantage. So, you know, tactically speaking, what's smart for me?
Well, I asked this because I have two daughters that I want them to train martial arts, but yet I don't want to be the dad that makes them feel like they're forced into it. So really what their training is right now is I'm just play fighting with them. And through play fighting, you know, they attack me, I'll pick them up, I'll put them down, you know, I'll get on top of them and then they can't get up. I'm like, put your knees in, you know, feet on the hips type of thing. One's more vicious than the other. But and then when I put a stick in their hand, like I get like the pool noodle type of thing. I'm trying to get my oldest daughter to learn some Balinta walk so that she could actually selfishly, so she could you know, feed me so that I can practice and then in return feed her. But I think it's important for, like you say, that, you know, understanding that you can do whatever, you know, they can do, but there is a point in where you have to be conscious of, you know, the differences. Like for example, I think it's you can see a female and a male, you know, have a fight or a duel in, you know, FMA and stuff like that, and it's fantastic to watch. But you know, you can't necessarily see the same thing in a boxing or Thai boxing, right? So there's something special about the weaponry because it's an extension of the body, and that's not necessarily relying on just the body, right? But now skill can be measured through the weapon.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's not to say that you can't prevail empty-handed, but you prevail because it was unexpected and your accuracy was really good and your evasive skills were really good. You really understood range, you really understood timing, you understood the psychology, and you took your moment, right? It's like, it's all possible, but having that awareness from a distance and being able to do that takes training. And I would also say, as far as the weaponry goes, if it sticks, you know, you're going to have to start working on the targeting. You know, ankle bones are always there, they're always vulnerable, you can always smack them, right? But if I hit you real hard on the outside of your arms, or even, you know, like on your shoulders, you know, even on your back or your chest, it's like maybe they're not going to do anything, you know. So you got to be smart about that too.
Yeah. Joints are where it's at.
Joints are where it's at, exactly.
So it's got to be difficult now for females who are, you know, coming up in certain sports and stuff like that. And we don't have to get into that. You can, because I can edit this out. But it's got to be difficult for females who are competing in sports that are not having, let's say, transgendered people who coming into the sport and actually causing a lot of physical damage. I think it's, personally, I think that is something that if you want to have a kind of a transgendered league, do that. But I think it's quite unfair to have that in sports context. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I have trans friends, and most of my trans friends look at the testosterone amount, and a lot of trans people have less testosterone than some women, right? So, you know, if you look at Olympic sports, women powerlifters are very different people than a high jumper, say, or a sprinter. You know, they all have different attributes, and so they really want it to be mixed and everybody should play with each other. I'm older, so I have more old-fashioned values, and I kind of agree with you. I think the trans people should absolutely get to compete, but just, you know, but I do think that you do have advantages because of the way you grew up, just your bone density and your musculature, that makes the taking damage part different. Nothing to do with skill or ability or power even. It's the taking damage part that is actually slightly different. It's like you can harden your body up somewhat, you know, but like those Muay Thai fighters, those small Thai guys, you know, they can take all kinds of damage, but they also have very short careers as well, you know. Yes. So it's not impossible, but they also have that upbringing as children where their testosterone is doing whatever it's doing, or the male parts of your body are doing what they're doing to create like more muscle attachments. You know, that there's just sort of more going on. So I'm worried about it because I'm worried about a lot of women getting really, really hurt.
And that's really what the important thing is here is the safety of the competitor.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the big the big fall downs with the whole competition thing, in essence, I think, is that they're blood sports. People do them because, I mean, all ring sports were invented so that soldiers off duty could bet money, and like the citizens could bet money, right? It's like they're meant to be exciting and fun and repeatable, right? You know, gladiatorial contests, obviously people died, but they're meant to be so that you can do them again and have rematches, but they're about money. I was listening to an interview with Bernard Hopkins about how he never really got fights because he was boring, because he was a defensive boxer, right? And so you hear that about Floyd Mayweather too, right? You hear it a lot about these defensive fighters, that there's no blood, there's no heart, you know, they're too clever and it's boring, you know. And so that's the other thing that I worry about in real competitions, is that the promoters aren't keeping their fighters safe. You know, they actually really don't care that much if you have a short career, as long as they make money. And so again, you're at a massive disadvantage, you know, getting thrown in. It's like, yeah, you know, you'll earn a whole bunch of money fighting this trans fighter or whatever, because that's what we do. It's like they're not looking out for anybody's interests or longevity. I mean, how old was Hopkins when he won? He was in his freaking 40s, wasn't he, when he got that title? And it's because he didn't get hit a lot.
It's very sad because, like you say, it is. They're like, basically they're like dogs in a dog fight, and they all have their handlers, and
yeah,
not all people are being, their best interests are being looked after. Do you find that females make better students than males? For the most part?
I was, when Sonny invited me to train with him, I asked him, but he wouldn't let me start until my teacher took me. You weren't allowed to go until, you know, it was okay with your teacher or you were taken by somebody. And my teacher refused because he said he doesn't teach women. And I'm like, he gave me an invitation, but he refused to take me, and nobody else that I knew would, because I was this other guy's student. It took me 2 years. One of those years I was away traveling, so maybe it might have been slightly different, but I was really pissed off. It was one of the reasons why I went away for a year and was traveling around Asia and India. And I came back and I wrote him a letter and I said, that's sexist bullshit, you know, take me, you know, shut up. And he did pretty much the next week, which was hilarious. So I went and there was no issue with it at all. Sonny liked students that listened, and I think women make better dance partners, if you like yeah. They're better at following a lead and paying attention. So there's less ego, there's less like, yeah, but I got you too. I mean, I'm not saying that we're not aggressive and I wasn't stupid and I was always trying to get hits. I mean, I was like that too, you know, I was annoying, but I think I was better at moving around. My footwork from Bagua really helped me in the Eskrima a lot, and so my balance is better. You know, my pivoting is better. You know, I just basically have better body mechanics. And yeah, I think women do make better students because they listen and they understand on some level that their technique is what's going to save them, not their brute force. But I think sometimes a school situation makes it really difficult because you're paired up with people that don't let you do the technique. So you never know how the technique's meant to work, right? Mm-hmm. So you either work with somebody that's not giving you anything to work with, or they just refuse to move or whatever. You know, it was...
That's a fantastic point. I never really, I mean, I'm sure I've thought of it, but not the way that you're articulating it now. And that is really, as a student, you know, not only do you have to work the technique, but you also have to learn how to extract the most out of your partner.
Yep, you do.
And that's a skill set in its own.
It's like pad holding, right? It's like the pad holder's job is way harder than the guy hitting the pads. And I see that in exactly the same way with a partner. It's like, if I give you the correct stimulus for this technique, it will work. Like every technique works somewhere, right? It's just the moment in time where it's perfect to pull off, where they're there, you're here with your weight there, and they're just about to do this. That's why the technique works. And if you can't mimic that, the technique is meaningless. And that's actually, again, why Sonny wanted the random flow to be the training, because you need to practice the moment. You need to have it happen in time. Yeah. So in the flow of time, this thing happens and you have made sure you're in the right place to take advantage of it. Or you're just so aware and you have it all in your body that it doesn't matter what happens. You're like, oh, well, if this happens, this is going to work. But if this happens now, this is going to work, right? So that you just feel it. You know, you're connected in such a way that you're moving with the other person that you're leading what's going to happen next. It's all about setting people up, basically.
Yeah, it's just finding the cadence and matching it, right? And you're right, because I do a lot of hard sparring, less and less as I get older and older, but it's there. Thank God I can still do it. But the real lessons are learned in the flow.
Yeah.
The real lessons are learned because it is at a pace that it is at a pace where the body has to, react. It gets to that level of, I guess, some adrenaline or real life energy, but it's also at a pace slow enough where your mind has the ability to process and adjust and feel and learn. And not just because when you go fast, you feel something, your body will do it, but it's doing it on autopilot. You're not necessarily understanding what you did and why. You just know that what you did worked, but you're not understanding what caused it to do that. And then when you go slower, you can actually quantify that and learn it at an intellectual level.
Well, can I disagree with you very slightly? I think you have to happen. It has to happen at a realistic enough pace that you can use it at full speed, right? But you have to work at the level that your nervous system can retain, like it can be in the moment. It can actually focus on stuff. Because tactically, what you want to see is you want to be able to change your mind as late as possible. You want actually your opponent to commit to something that you can take advantage of. But if you go first and commit to something, then they can take advantage of you, right? So your job, why you want to slow it down, is to see how late you can suddenly,
pivot.
Yeah, like do something else. It's like, oh, I'm going to feed this, but no, I'm now going to do this, right? So your ability, even your ability to weight shift just between those tiny increments of space is like a huge skill.
100%.
And so that's why slow, I think, is useful, but it has to also be, you can't pretend that it's always going to be that slow, because your eyes do have to recognize it at full speed too.
Yeah, and not to say that you always keep it at that level, but it's important to also train at that level, because people, especially males, and this is why I asked, because I always found it easier for females to be okay training with this kind of template and not rush to always get to the next thing, because you can do it slow, you can do it fast, but we also like doing it as you'll go slow and then just ramp up and then change speed, so like try to create that element of shock or surprise and have the body react and then go back to what that cadence was. But like I say, my point is that I always found it harder for males to want to do that, to slow it down and listen than it was for a female. And I always enjoyed working with females at seminars, not because when I was single, some of them are cute, I just wanted to talk to them, full disclosure, but also because of that. They were always I always found them much more smooth.
Yeah, they want to get it right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that's the real, you notice it when you're in a martial art. Like the other thing I teach outside of Eskrima is Bagua, right? And that's a much more traditional system. So we have applications and things. But if you have a multi-step application, so it's like 1, 2, 3 parts or something, everybody wants to do part 3. They just want the win at the end, and they don't realize the only reason why part 3 works is because 1 happened. And then you transition to 2 and 3 happen next. It's like the point is not to get to the end. Yeah. The point is the journey. It's the journey, not the destination, if you like.
So when you're writing these books, and when you're writing your books and you're discussing the deception and the different avenues to employ this, does that also mean that, like, for deceiving somebody, you want to you kind of move at, for an example, the best way I can describe it, in the UFC fight with Masvidal, he was very relaxed, leaning against the cage, and once the fight started, he kind of started coming in slow and then just changed and came with a flying knee. That movement as well, that deception of movement, and when you're moving your weapon on certain lines, the space or the way you move it, how do you articulate that to somebody in your book, and how do you articulate that to a student?
Well, the easy answer is to say time spent. It's like, it takes practice. Everybody, I think, is very used to moving at constant speed in the martial arts. And really, it's all about acceleration and deceleration. And so to have that control, between I'm suddenly like, I'm fast, but then I'm slower again, and then I'm fast. It's like, you need as much body integration as one of those body poppers, when the dancers, that are doing this. Because if you're really good, I can separate out the movement from my elbow. Like I can move my elbow without my hand moving, and I can move my shoulder separately, right? And I can move all the different parts. You know, I could do like really sort of short moves, and I can really do like long moves. So I can change. I mean, it's one of the things I talk also about in the Hustler book, and also the Lion, the Cheat, and the Thief. Is that sometimes you can't fight as yourself, right? It's like the reason why you're picking a rhythm to fight at should be because of who the other person is.
Oh, I like that.
Right. And so you actually need some fighting personalities. You know, you maybe want like a kind of a fast, wiggly, sort of like shaky personality, or you want something like slower. You know, you want all these different ways of playing. And what I found is that people are really embarrassed. It's like telling somebody to dance like someone else. Like, you know what I mean? It's like we all dance like ourselves, and it's really difficult to dance not like you. And if you're predictable, like somebody's like, oh yeah, like they always, they you know, they've got this thing going on. It's like, you know, you're totally easy to read. And so big part of Sonny's work was mirroring. So why I learned was I would just watch him, and I would like literally do everything he was doing, and that gave me a rhythm to follow. And then he'd do a different rhythm, and so then I'd follow another kind of rhythm that he was doing, and that gave me another one. And so now I have this like toolbox of all these different ways of moving that I can use.
It's like a chameleon.
Yeah, it's more like a kind of a snake charmer, right? Like, that's the point. It's like, how much can I influence your movement, and how much can I make you predictable? Like, you can tell most people's rhythms real fast. It's not that hard, you know. And people loop.
Yes,
unless they're really, really good.
Have you ever dealt with somebody who was very good at breaking rhythm, and how did you adjust?
It depends how long you have, obviously. I mean, you know, when you're flowing with somebody, this is why we flow, is like, you know, Sonny's whole thing was like, you need to see, you need to experience and see as many different personalities and people as you can, so you can go, oh, you know, you start looking at the precursors for when that thing's going to happen. You know, you start looking at that intent where it's like a monkey that sees a piece of fruit and it really, really wants it. You know, you want to start to flash on all those things where like, oh, they're thinking about it. You know, and then change something, so suddenly they're not thinking about it anymore. You want to start looking at threes. Human beings always want to do, you know, combinations of three things, you know, and it's like this weird, like the waltz is a very human thing. And so you can use all these basic things, and if somebody's higher level, sure, they're super hard to read, but then understanding that they're super hard to read suddenly makes you go, oh, this person's high level, right? So it's like all these things that work on the less skilled people I can throw out the window. All right, now we're working here, right? So again, anything will give you intel, even like no intel, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, because that's why I say it's not win or lose, it's win or learn.
Yeah.
And those people will show you what the next tier is for you to aspire to get to.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite fighter is Lomachenko, right? And how he fights. And his use of rhythm is just wonderful. I love it. And also his use of the pivot, which I'm a huge fan of too.
Yeah, he's great at making angles. So finding who you are through the martial art, finding your rhythm, finding your style, or finding your cadence, did that now start to make you kind of help you develop on the weapons? Because you got into creating weaponry. Creating knives and stuff like that. Are these all things you take into consideration when you start to design your tools?
Well, one of the things I love of Sonny, which is one of the most fascinating things, is that every weapon has a personality. It has a natural cadence because of its weight. It has a natural cadence because of its shape. There's different parts of the sword that you use because of the shape it is. So if you look at Filipino weapons design, it's incredibly sophisticated. They just have a myriad of different weapons, right? I mean, just kind of Google it. It's just mind-boggling. And they're all different shapes. They're all different lengths. They're all different sizes. They all are balanced in a different place. And they all have a personality. So the personality shows you what it's for, how it moves, how it recycles the energy. You know, is it a poking weapon? Is it a fast tipped weapon? Is it a heavy tipped weapon? Is it a slicing weapon? Is it a chopping weapon, right? It's like all these different things can come into blades. That is, I mean, I've thought about doing a whole seminar just on sword usage, because I think it's the huge part that's missing from people's blade work. You can totally tell when people are stick fighters and then they put a sword in their hands because they use the sword like a stick. And it doesn't work like that. There's just so much more in swords. And so my love of them kind of came from this idea of what's it for? What does it do? Right. And Sonny was given a lot of swords and, by other people, and he modified every one of them. And the fascinating thing was when you put them all in your hand, they were all balanced amazingly well. Even the heavy ones were easy to work with. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. You're modifying these swords so they work. It's like, all right, yeah. And he made his training blades the same way. So he wanted his training blades to look as close to the real thing as possible. And so it was from him that I learned the idea of blade design and what you could do with it. I've actually got one of his training blades right here that I'll show you.
Oh, I'd love to see it.
So this is a short panuti. And you see that?
Yeah.
So it's like this tip, the fact that it comes backwards a little bit, this part on the back that kicks out, this piece on the front that kicks out, the shape of this handle, like where it's balanced, which is, usually about here on this blade, gives you a whole bunch of information about this sword, like how it works with the back end, how you can hold it in your hands, what you can, how it moves in space. Gives this blade personality. And he did this also with his short weapons. I haven't actually designed a sword yet because I still like his better than mine. But I decided to design a blade. Oh, actually, first I decided to design just one, which is the Vari. And I don't have that with me, sadly, but I do have the Moika, which is the second one, which is this blade.
Oh, that's nice.
So the idea is that, you can roll this and do kind of fun stuff with it. It's just sharp on one edge. A lot of Filipino stuff is only sharp on one edge so that you can actually use you can do stuff with the back and stuff. But it is sharp on the tip a little bit on both sides. But again, the design is absolutely inspired, inspired by him. And it was mostly because anything that I found online, I didn't want to own. And so I decided to make my own. So I could carry them. Oh, I just want to show you this because this is really fun. My friend Jer Lindsay made this for me. If you've ever seen Filipino sword scabbards, you'll know they're made out of two pieces of wood, usually just with string wrapped around them.
Yeah.
Because they have this, even though you can pull them this way, they have this get out of jail free card where they actually they pull out the side as well. And so you can cut through the string and, get somebody else. But yeah, so he made me this. It doesn't fall out, but you can see how here it slips out the end.
So what's your process when you start to sit down and say, okay, here I am, I'm going to create a knife. What's your process? Because honestly, I love to draw and I love blades and, but I'd like to, if I'm going to play with it, I need to understand the functionality and all these other components. What's your process to decide what it's going to look like?
Mostly because nothing exists that I want. So that's pretty easy. So it's like, what do I want? Well, I want something that does this. What do I find satisfying about Sonny's blades, right? It's like, well, the way they moved and the way they handled and they were so comfortable in the hand, he always knew where the edge was. They have a very special feel in hand. And maybe that was it. It's like you look at photos of blades online and the photo doesn't tell you how it moves because you can't feel it. And it's that putting it in your hand and feeling something and you're like, yeah, okay, this is cool. So I made it because it didn't exist.
What would you say are the best three things or best 3 points that make a knife a good knife?
Oh, well, it depends what you need it for.
Just a regular everyday tool.
Really, again, depends on what you need it for, but I can tell you the theory a little bit behind what I designed is that I really like the idea that you carry the knife and it's the knife. It's the knife that does everything. My grandfather, who the Vari is kind of named after because Vari means grandfather in Finnish. The Finnish knife, the puukko, Puukko, is very famous in Finland, and it's like the knife. Back in the day where everybody walked around with knives all the time, this is the knife that you did because you went fishing, you went, maybe small game hunting, you used it for cutting cord, you ate with it, you just did all the stuff with your knife. You didn't have like, a special one of these and one of these, it's nothing, it's like a generic working knife. And so the Vari is made like that. It's got a really thick back, so it's a woodsman's knife, really. You can bang on the back of it with a hammer to split wood. It's actually straight enough that you can throw it. It balances, so you can use it like a Bowie knife. You know, that was one of the sort of inspirations too, was this sort of like 19th century Bowie idea. That it's just like the knife that you have. You know, you can still eat with it. I think there's a photo on the website of me slicing tomatoes with it. And this is a slightly smaller one. I mean, the other thing I would say to you when you're designing knives is that very tiny differences make huge differences to the knife design. And when I designed the Vari, when it came out as big as it did, I really laughed because I didn't expect it to be that big a knife, right? I expected it to be about the size of this one, and it's bigger than this one. And so I was like, oh my God, I've totally designed a dude blade.
That's awesome.
Just so you know, and I'm going to pimp this because it just tickled me so much. It's Barry Eisler, who's wrote all the John Rain books. Has also a series called Livy Alone. And Livy Alone is a woman from Thailand who emigrates, actually gets trafficked over to the United States. And she's a cop in Seattle. And I'm her knife teacher, and she carries a Vari.
Oh, wow. Very cool. I'll have to post some pictures of that afterwards when I edit that in. But yeah, I noticed it right away. I was like, wow, that's a fantastic, that looks like a nice, that weapon looks like it could chop through something very, very easily.
Yeah, but so this one's smaller. So this one's more like my size, and this is why I kind of made it, because the Vari's, I gave the Vari to my husband. He likes carrying that one. And I did carry it for a while, but this one's more my body type for like usage and stuff like that. I like it.
So with regards to the handles now, what kind of handles do you, and I know you say it is, you know, depending on what the knife is for. So forgive me for my general question, but when you're looking for a handle, if you're looking for something that you could use fluently, what kind of characteristics are you looking for as opposed to something that you're looking to like chop or hack?
I want to know where the blade edge is. So if you actually look at Sunny's training blade here, it's very thin in this direction and much wider in this direction. So I always have a good idea where the edge is, right? So I can really control where the edge is. So I don't like round handles. This one actually doesn't have it, but I usually like an indicator right behind the index finger where that is. And I like a little bit of a kind of an end as a stop. So those are my things. If you look at this one, I actually have a Ranger band on here. This is like one of those, you know, more survivally things. But there's an indent here. You see how it's real narrow?
Yeah.
So again, I always know where the handle is. It gets a bit wider here, but then there's this sort of little indent here at the end so that there's some kind of positive, like a stop, if you like, on it. So I like to know where the blade is when the blade's in my hand. You know, I want to know that it's not somehow slightly off. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it also has a thumb indent here on the back. So there's like a, point that camera to the right.
Do you have people like who, for example, say they like the look of the actual blade itself, but they try to customize their handle to fit their own needs?
Oh, they should. You know, I actually say that in the Vari. The Vari actually just comes with a skeleton handle and a wrap on it, or it comes with micarta scales that you can take off. The whole point is that you should modify it to make it work for your hand. It's one of the reasons why I put the Ranger band on it, because I like that positive grip that it gives me. There's usually one that's around the back too, you know. And Sonny would always customize his handles. He would add little, even if it was like an elastic band, he'd tie around it, or he'd kind of carve the handle so it fitted hand. I don't like finger holes. I don't like to be that specific on a handle, but I like putting stuff on it, or, you know, making it so it fits. It should fit your hand. If you've got really big hands, the blade can be, you know, like fatter because it's got to be comfortable, right? It's like, so you should make it so it works for you. That is the point of the Vari handle, is that it is modifiable. Even this one, because it's wood, I would have no problem with somebody kind of, you know, if they wanted to make like a finger notch in here or something. No, I don't care. Add a landing on the back. There's a hole for it if you want to. You know, make this more of an indent. Cut the top off. Whatever works for you. That's the point.
Yeah, the knife should be unique to the person wielding it.
Well, you should feel You know, like there's all this superstition around swords. You know, there's a lot of weird stuff, and where you have them hang in your house, like the antique. And, you know, if you go to Asian cultures, particularly, they have a real respect for the swords, how they're displayed. You know, a lot of times there'll be like a shrine kind of thing around it, because the blade can hurt you just as much as it can hurt somebody else. You know, there's a lot of superstitions around blades that I think comes from that idea that you have got to feel very comfortable with a live weapon, like a firearm. It's like, you got to trust that this thing is on your side. And so you do everything so that when you take it out, it doesn't feel like a problem. Like you're not frightened of it. Does that make sense? You got to kind of own it.
That's kind of like the warrior's way. Like I have a friend of mine who he's a he's an awesome martial artist. He invited us over to their temple, and they train Gatka, so Indian martial art. And the way that they respect their weapons, there isn't a way they pick up their weapons without first, you know, showing respect to it, picking it up, and they really treat it like it is something to be respected. And that's huge, because, you know, a lot of places, you know, especially like here in North America, like you're learning a knife or you're learning a stick, or let's just kind of like, here, just take it and get right into it, where the history behind it, the respect for the tool, it's not really something that's taught as much as it should be. And I think once you taught that from the beginning, you kind of give value to what it is you're working with and why it should be respected.
Well, you know, just watch some old samurai movies and see how many people like draw their katanas and kill the friend next to them. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't, it's an amoral object. It's the only weapon. The sword is the only weapon designed by human beings to kill humans. Purely. Does that make sense? It's like knives you can do a whole bunch of other things with. You know, spears you can get game. You know, arrows can kill game. A sword is people specific, you know, and so there's a real darkness to it, and you can see why a lot of like fantasy novels have this, you know, weapons that are magic, and they have this darkness in them that like sucks your soul out every time you use it or something, right? And so you can see why when you're around them and when you touch them. And blades do have vibes. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're sensitive to it, you can put one in your hand, and it like. Sonny had one that was given to him that there was this tiny little Chris. It's like super wavy blade.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing metal. Like it was kind of like it had splots on it. It was like dark with like these white like patterns on it. It was beautiful. Super old handle, very old blade. And he's like, "What do you think of this?" And the handle, by the way, was wood. It was round, and it had hairs sticking out of it, like sticking outwards, like into your hand when you gripped it, like tiny little hairs. Really? And somebody said they were human hairs, and I was like, oh, yeah, all right. And I mean, it's a good grip, right? Even if it was bloody, it'd still have this real friction on there. And I pulled it out, and I was just like, it felt like an incredibly beautiful poisonous snake. Like literally, you know, I had in my head some tropical snake, and I was like, that's nice, I don't need to touch that ever again, thank you very much. And he would keep it tied up with a scarf around the scabbard on the wall. You can see it in some of the videos.
Wow.
You know, and they feel, you know, I've felt blades that were very sad, that are old blades from like the 1600s that had a deep sadness to them. I've also felt blades that were super clear. They had like this clear ringing, like very clear feel to them, like they were real positive. So it's kind of fun when you have a chance to play with stuff. Yeah.
I've never even thought about, I don't think I've experienced that. I've never even thought about it that way. That's pretty cool. So when you feel those kinds of blades, having that kind of ability to feel that, does that help you kind of discover on what kind of weapon or blade you would want to use, depending on how it's the synergy between your own personal vibration?
Well, I think, you know, there's a style of blade, obviously, that you resonate with just because it happens to fit nicely with your physiology, like the length of it and the size of it. And again, a huge amount of stuff to talk about there that we don't have time in, that most blades in the Philippines are made to fit your body. Like they are the length they are because that's how long your arms are or how long your torso is, right? That's why they are how they are. So you've got a style that suits your personality. And then you have you know, whatever it is. But then it's very specific. It has to be the individual blade, and they're different from each other. I'll tell you one interesting story about that. We went to a dealer, me and some friends, to have a look at some antique blades once. And a friend of mine who's also part Portuguese, interestingly enough, he pulled out this long pinuti, right, this long sword, and he pulls it out and he's like, oh my God, this feels really weird. This is like very, very weird to me. He's like, Maya, what do you think? So he gave it to me. I was like, I don't know. I don't feel really, I get anything off this sword. And if you turned it around, the handle, like this part of the handle, was the shape of a head, like it was a human head, and it had black hair and blue eyes, and it had a rope around its neck, and it had like this real grimace on its face. And I reckon it was an anti-Magellan blade. And so maybe he felt it because he had Portuguese blood, and you know, my Viking Finnish blood had like, I don't know, I'm not an enemy.
That's amazing. That's something cool to consider. I've never really considered that. And when you started looking at blades, obviously, because I mean, I can tell you, obviously, for the martial arts and everything like that, you're passionate about it. Do you like to study and research blades from different parts of the world, different like, what do you look for when you're looking for? Are you looking for a commonality, or are you just looking for the beauty and difference?
I'm trying to understand it. Like, again, looking at pictures is wonderful, but being able to handle it, I want to be, you know, one of my ambitions is to be able to put anything in my hand and go, oh, this moves like this. This is how this works. This is what this is designed for. And to understand that just by the feel of it in my hand, that would be really super cool.
Are you working on anything low key right now?
I teach some Zoom classes, you know, during the weirdness, of course, there's no seminars going on. Renee, our mutual friend, keeps saying that he's going to have me up there in Canada. We shall see if that ever happens.
Well, listen, if he does that, I will be the first one to tell him I'll be there.
Nice. It would be nice to meet you for sure.
Yeah, no, I would love to learn more on, you know, the deception part, because for me, I feel like I do that a lot with empty hand already, and I feel like I'm pretty good at breaking rhythm when I do spar, when I do fight. I've been told I'm able to close distance quite quickly, and deceive people that they think I'm in a range I can't hit them, because I am shorter guy, but I can cover a long distance quicker. But I'd love to add more of the deception to use that to my benefit for those entries.
Yeah, and I think sword is a wonderful vehicle for that. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, well, why would I learn sword? It's such an arcane weapon. It's like, well, it teaches you things. And every weapon style teaches you things. Everything gives you an insight into some aspect. And I think one of the things that sword does is give you an insight into the deceptive arts. Like we were saying at the beginning, that you take power out of the equations, you take size out of the equation, you take the fact that you can just run in and do what you like out of the equation. And now suddenly it's like, well, okay, well, what do you have?
You have to be very refined.
Yeah, very refined. Yeah, your angle's got to be sharper. Like I said, your timing's got to be better. Your range has got to be better. You know, it's interesting.
It really is. So I'm going to, I mean, I could talk to you longer, but I have to get ready to teach a class.
I know.
But listen, I was expecting this to be very good, but I've picking up things that I didn't think I was going to pick up. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Hopefully we can do this again.
Yes.
I feel like you got a lot more to share, and I got a lot more to listen to. I think it's amazing to see, you know, how diverse you are. And I think it's very cool for other females in the martial arts to see how diverse and all the different aspects you're getting into. I especially love the fact that you make weapons. Like that's really cool. Not only can you use it, but you make it and you write about it. So you're really covering quite a bit. You know, you're very multi-depth into what you're doing. I think that's super important. It's kind of like you can't just learn an art. You have to immerse yourself in the culture, and you're coming about it through various different artistic mediums. I think is really fantastic.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It was very nice to talk to you too. I mean, I think if you start to understand that most martial arts were invented because of disadvantage, and that's what the thinking is, and that's what everything's in there, I think women are specifically well placed. Or if you're older or if you're injured, it's like suddenly you're like, oh shit, that's not going to work anymore. Now what? You know, and so it gives you the incentive to start looking deeper, because all that deeper stuff is in there. Even in all the old traditional arts, it's in there. It's just that most people don't ever even look.
Yeah, it's like you say, why? What's the blade for? What's it for? What's the why? You know, same thing with art. What's the why? Once you understand the why, you know, it's one thing to witness something. It's another thing to understand why. It's like somebody, why did he do that?
Yeah.
Because he's an asshole, or because, well, he just went through this, you know, traumatizing event. It kind of gives you a different perspective and a different understanding. So yeah, definitely, whatever you do, you should be understanding the why or where the root came from, if you want to know where you want to go with it.
And that even goes to every micro level, like, you know, why did they do that? Why did they try and hit you? You know?
Yeah. What am I? Yeah. And that's the cool thing about the self-defense too, is not just being aware of your potential attacker or your environment, because self-defense is not against a person. It's also against your environment.
Yeah.
What am I doing that's attracting that? Which I don't think people ask that either.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, for women, it's pretty easy. It's like, you know, you've got this big target on your head, right? And it's like, sometimes you can't get rid of that target. I mean, I know you've got to go, but it's one thing that I think is really important for women to understand. It's like, yeah, you can look like a hard target, absolutely. But some people are never going to believe that you're hard enough for them not to take on. Even for guys, right? Maybe there's 3 of them. They're going to take you. You know what I mean? Like, you can look big and strong. It's not like there's that disparity of force only for women. But it's like, okay, what do they see and how can I play that?
Yeah.
It's like, use the fact that that's how they think you are.
Use it against them.
Yeah, that I think is the thinking.
Yeah, I definitely have to have you on here again and get more into that, because I find that, I mean, that's what I looked for in martial arts, is how do I even the playing odds. And it's not just about physicality; it's being smart and using language and body mechanics. I mean, from what I understand, I can't remember what the percentage was, or where I read it somewhere, but most of our interaction, like our language, like speaking, auditorial, is very minimal.
Yeah,
we're not really understanding the conversations going on in the in-betweens. But yeah, so where can everybody reach out to you and see more of your knives? I got this one site here. But
yeah, the Patreon page is where you can find me there. The book, the Lie, the Cheat, and the Thief book, there's a video set that goes with this that you can order online, and then there's a group on Facebook you can join if you order the videos. So yeah, the Patreon, I guess, or you can just always get me through you, I guess, if you know, people want to do that.
Yeah, reach out to me. Your book's been ordered. I'm waiting for it to get here.
Get this one though. Get this one too.
I will get both. And when you come to Canada, you can sign it for me if you don't mind.
I will, absolutely.
All right. So listen, thank you so much for being on the Parley. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation. I look forward to doing it again.
Absolutely. Take care, Mark. Nice to meet you.